This is what you should feel. You are what you should feel.
I remember way back when I was still in high school, I was playing games on my computer when my mum opened up the door, peeked her head in, and told me she was home for lunch. So I literally thought nothing of it. Only thing I felt was off was the blue shirt she was wearing, which I'd never seen her wear before. But then again, I never cared much about those sort of details to begin with. Anyway, an hour goes by, and my mum opens up the door, and she peeks her head in and tells me she just went on lunch and wanted to know if I wanted to get some of her fries. I told her I'd just seen her an hour ago, and that she told me she was on lunch and how she was wearing a blue shirt, which, at this point, she was wearing a white shirt. She looked confused and told me she hasn't been home all day since leaving to work, and that it was 1 p.m. when she usually takes lunch. I still don't know if that was a doppelganger or a spirit or if I had like a weird mental moment. But I never got a scared feeling, nor an out-of-worldly presence from who I believed to be my mum. I've seen and heard a few stories. They aren't very creepy or anything, but to me they were. My dad woke me up once, shaking me awake and telling me to get up in a very urgent tone, which he rarely used. I didn't turn around to face him or anything. I just fell back asleep after hearing heavy footsteps walk off. I later woke up in a panic thinking I had missed an appointment or something. He said he hadn't even left his room. The second time this happened, I woke up and felt like I was being watched. This time I opened my eyes and glanced over to the bathroom door, and my sibling was staring at me. They slowly moved over to the edge of the bed, like weirdly slow. I sat up and told them to go back to bed. That house was so creepy, and I know they wouldn't head downstairs in the middle of the night, no matter what. I offered to bring them back up, but they didn't seem to register anything I was saying. So they sat down, and it was pretty much a wordless staring contest. Eventually, they left in that same saunter, and I wearily fell back asleep and asked about it in the morning. Yep, they never left their room upstairs. I barely slept while I lived in that house. It was always loud, and every night brought something different. Anytime I would sleep, I would be startled awake by something. The last one I can remember was my sister coming home, the front door opening and slamming with her yelling up at us, saying she was home, before hearing her jog downstairs. She was supposed to be at work, so my mum and I exchanged glances. I went to go greet her. I looked everywhere. All the rooms were empty, and the house was quiet. The door never opened again, and everyone in the house at that time was upstairs. We messaged both her and my older sister, both of which were not home and never came home. I kind of wish I got to see what opened the door. Everyone in the house heard it, so that one I can confirm wasn't brought on by sleep-deprived hallucinations. Weird stuff, really. The first two happened at my grandma's house, where one person passed away. The second was in our old home. Maybe it was the house that was haunted, but for whatever reason, I saw my husband's doppelganger at least twice while we lived there. The first time was after I drove him to work. It was a 45-minute drive each way, and I was just getting back home. When I pulled up in front of the house, there he was, standing on the porch, smoking a cigarette. Same black hat and red shirt he had on when I dropped him off. I looked away for a second to put the car in park, and when I looked again, he was gone. I hopped out of the car and looked on either side of the house for him. I was so confused. I called and asked him where he was. Obviously, he was still miles away at work. I thought I was going crazy. The second time, I was not alone. We had a friend of ours over at the house, who I'll refer to as W. W and I were hanging out in the kitchen, eating munchie food, and my husband was outside for whatever reason, I forget. Before I continue, the house was set up like this. The kitchen is the first room you walk into from the front door / front porch. It's the only room on the bottom floor. There's a set of wooden stairs in the kitchen that leads upstairs to the rest of the house. In front of the house is the main road, so you have to walk off the porch onto the sidewalk and around to the side of the house to get to the yard. Okay, so we're both in the kitchen, but I'm leaning over the counter eating leftover halapukis, and W is at the kitchen table facing the door. My husband bursts through the door and runs through the kitchen, slamming the door shut behind him. I only see him out of my periphery. After a second, W says to me, "Where did he just go?" And a chill goes up my spine. I turn around, and he's not there. I don't even bother checking the stairs because they're very loud, and I would have heard him. I knew what it was. I say to W, that wasn't him, and go towards the door to check outside and prove to both of us that he was still out there. This is where it gets hilarious. W grabs the back of my shirt, terrified, and yells, "Don't open the door." I bravely open the door and yell for my husband, who responds, "Yeah?" and comes walking around the house from the side yard. Our simple friend then says to him, "Dude, someone just ran into your house," causing my husband to go into attack mode, running into the house searching for the intruder. I know this is ridiculous because W didn't act as if a stranger ran into the house when we were in the kitchen. In fact, I think he even said something to him before asking me where he went. I stop them both and say, "Wait a minute. W, what did you see?" And he looks at my husband and says, "I saw you." At that moment, we all realized what happened. We saw something supernatural. We were thoroughly freaked out, and W refuses to talk about it to this day. This happened about 13 years ago, when I was around 6 or 7 years old. I'd like to start off and set the scene. My parents were not religious, and at this point in time, I hadn't been exposed to much religious subject matter, nor did I actually believe people could die. My father also used to work at night, since he was the only one able to work due to my mum's declining health, both physically and mentally. We lived in a rented 2-story house, where the kitchen looked out into an open living room. That night, I was sitting on the counter as my mum was feeling well enough to pour me some milk and just in general bond with me before I went to bed, only to head to school the next morning. There was absolutely nothing weird about that day or night besides what happened. As she was pouring me milk, I was looking out into the living room, just sitting and waiting, when I turned my head and saw my dad standing there. I remember how confused I was, because not a moment before, I was just looking there, and then another moment, he's standing there. I didn't think it was too strange at first, because it was my dad. I expected him to approach or say something, but he never did. He just stood there and stared at us, arms at his side, just looking at us. He didn't blink once. His expression was completely neutral, but his eyes were just opened enough that I could see across the room. He was staring at us. It was weird at first, just waiting for him to say something to me, but he never did. He just stood there, and I kept staring back, and it started to scare me, especially when the longer I looked at him, the more just wrong he looked. His eyes were too small. It looked like him, just kinda off. He stood there long enough that I started rubbing my eyes and blinking, thinking I was seeing things. But he just kept standing there, unmoving, until after one of my blinks, he just disappeared. That's what scared me more than anything. With how the room was laid out and how creaky the floors were, for him to have even moved as fast as he did, he'd have had to open one of the doors next to him and slam it shut for it to be possible for him to just disappear as fast as he did. There was no way he could run away that fast, especially with how open the living room was. I didn't notice it when he first appeared, but our floors creaked loudly every time someone walked around, even if they were as light-footed as they could be. I refused to go over to that area for the remaining few months before we moved after my mum took her own life, unrelated to the incident, which I discovered after writing up the original version of this. I would have chalked this up to being my mind playing tricks on me if my mum hadn't also told my dad about this experience. I never said a word to my mum. I only looked at her, and I thought she didn't see it, but looking back, I'm pretty sure I saw her turn and also look, not long after I started staring at whatever it was. I only found out many years later my mum had seen it when I was telling my dad about the experience, and he mentioned she told him. But because my mum had a history of being mentally ill, it was brushed off. The experience really scared me to the point that I started to sleep with the lights on until about a few years ago. I've thankfully never seen anything quite like it since, so hopefully that stays the case. This happened more than 13 years ago in my old childhood home. This is just the first of 3 incidents that occurred when I was a kid and in my late teens. This happened to my brother. So for context, my house was very much haunted and weird stuff happened all the time. I could go on, but that's for another time. Me and my brother shared one room, and our parents' room was right next to ours. There was a long hallway in front of our room that led to the kitchen. The hallway took a sharp right turn, and you'd end up in the kitchen. Even during daytime, this hallway was dark and dimly lit, but the kitchen had windows and was usually brightly lit during daytime. On this particular day, me and my brother were just chilling in our room. I was on my bed reading a book, and my brother was on the PC. After a while, he left the room and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. He came back with a concerned look on his face. He asked me if I had been in the kitchen when he was there, and I said no. I was just in the room reading my book. What he told me next still gives me chills. According to him, he opened the fridge to grab a snack, and when he looked up, he saw me standing at the kitchen doorway. He called out my name. I didn't respond and just stared at him with a blank expression on my face. He thought I was just trying to mess with him, so he chuckled to himself and told me to cut it out. But I still didn't respond, and now I had this weird grin on my face. So he just started walking up to me, and I started running from the hallway towards my room. When he walked out of the kitchen to catch up with me, I was gone. He thought it was weird, but just assumed that I ran into the room. He asked me repeatedly because he genuinely thought I was messing with him. I reassured him that I was not in the kitchen at that time. We were both freaked out and just felt weird the entire day. We decided never to talk about it again. I blocked this out of my memory, and reading the stuff here reminded me of this incident. This is the second encounter I had with my doppelganger. This is the only time I saw this entity with my own eyes, and it still creeps me out to this day, 11 years later. This happened back in December 2011, close to Christmas Day. I was on vacation with my family. We stayed in a small 2-story house in a gated community. A family friend of ours let us stay at this house since they had moved abroad years ago. The house had 3 rooms, 2 upstairs and 1 room downstairs facing the kitchen. I stayed in one of the upstairs room with my mum, 3-year-old sister and my older brother. I was 11 at the time, so I still remembered this incident clear as day. Like I mentioned earlier, this was a gated community, so it was usually very quiet at night. And apart from the lights from the houses and the street lights, it got pretty dark. For context, I've never been afraid of the dark. I've always believed in ghosts, spirits and stuff like that since I was raised religious. And I always prayed before going to bed. I still do occasionally, mostly out of habit, but I'm not that religious anymore. But the idea of encountering a ghost never scared me, due to my childhood home being haunted. My parents, my siblings, all encountered ghosts there, but I had never seen an apparition or anything of the sort up until this point. I did hear the occasional footsteps, doors being opened and closed, weird noises, you know, the cliche stuff. This happened one night after the usual day of shopping and sightseeing. We came home pretty late, and I went to bed around 11 p.m. I slept on a mattress next to the bed with my head next to the foot of the bed. There was a small cupboard directly in front of the mattress. I'm pointing this out for later, as it's important for the context of the story. I got up around 3 a.m. to go to the bathroom. I'm a very light sleeper, so even if I wake up during the middle of the night, I won't be half asleep or anything like that. I was wide awake when I went into the bathroom and got out. I picked up my blanket to lie back down, and as I did, my eyes landed on where the cupboard was, and I just froze. Literal chills ran down my spine. There, sitting cross-legged directly where the cupboard was this figure of a young boy, about my age and size. I looked closely and observed him. I noticed that he wore the same pajamas that I was wearing. The same hair, same t-shirt, same everything. Then I realized that I was literally staring at myself. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My body just completely froze up, and I almost fell backwards. When my voice finally came out, I just screamed for my mum. She woke up and quickly turned the lights on. She had a puzzled look on her face and asked me what was wrong. I couldn't speak and just pointed at the cupboard. And there it was. The cupboard was back to where it was supposed to be. No more apparition. Whatever I saw had completely vanished into thin air. I was able to go back to sleep that night, but it did take me some time. I slowly fell back asleep, all the while staring at the cupboard. Whatever I saw that night, I still can't give a logical explanation to it. I'm glad that at least my family believes me. Since I've never been afraid of the dark, I was never the type of kid that made weird shapes in the dark and got scared. For the longest time, I just brushed it off as my imagination as I got older. Mainly because this was just too scary for me to remember. Until my mum encountered the same entity years later. So now I know with absolute certainty that I didn't imagine this. I live in a relatively small town, and recently, something strange has been happening. People have been saying that there's kind of a twin of mine a ghostly double, wandering around the town. The weird part? I've never seen this twin, even though everyone else seems to have. It started with people telling me stories about meeting me in places I'd never been. Sally, who works at the bakery, swears she saw me staring at her from a distance at the farmer's market. The thing is, I wasn't anywhere near the market that day. I was at work. The stories got weirder. Co-workers talked about me reading at the park, but I'm more of a stay-at-home and watch TV kind of guy. These stories have turned into a big deal, and now people I don't even know approach me, convinced they've seen me before, when I'm pretty sure they hadn't, at places I'm sure I hadn't been. So we decided to play detective and check out the places where this doppelganger supposedly showed up. As we walked around the town at night, there was a strange feeling in the air, like something was about to happen, and then it did. The doppelganger appeared, standing right in front of me, copying everything I did. It was like I was looking into a mirror. It was a surreal moment, like meeting a stranger who knows everything about you. As everyone scattered, the twin faded away, leaving me confused and concerned. The stories of my unseen double still linger, but they're starting to die off. I'm wondering what the hell it was. Has anyone else experienced something similar? Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know, or people I know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added once I get back from Australia in November. Also, I will be redoing my merch store when I get back, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.